G'day and welcome to this episode of Inside the Piranha Club. I'm Rebecca Clancy.
I'm Ben Hunt.
And I'm Mark Manbryans.
And in this episode, as you may have already guessed, we are going to take a look back at the Australian Grand Prix. There is plenty to talk about in a race that was won by the Mercedes of George Russell. His teammate Kimi Antonelli was just behind him in second, and Ferrari of Charles Leclerc filled the podium to take third. So, lots and lots to talk about from the weekend. We will come on to the regulations and what it all meant for the racing. But I want to start with George Russell on a positive note because it was, in the end, a very dominant victory for him. Mercedes are absolutely storming through Albert Park. No one seemed to be able to catch them or get near them. A 1-2 for the season opener, and it just cemented what we were all saying beforehand, that George Russell is the favourite for this championship. Don't you think, Ben?
Game over.
Or we'll all just go home.
Yeah, that's it. All over for another year. I mean, that's what you were saying the other day. You know, George is going to absolutely destroy the rest of the field, and he'll be hundreds of points ahead by the halfway stage. So, kind of predicted it right.
Yeah, I know. My husband hates it when I'm right as well. Don't worry about it. But they just looked so strong. We had that great battle for 12 laps between him and Charles Leclerc. Leclerc had that amazing start, and we discussed this, didn't we, particularly after testing. The Ferraris are really strong off the start, as it proved to be. And then we had 125 overtakes in this race. I think most of them were actually in those first 10 laps. It was a lot of fun to watch.
Massively so. I mean, it's well worth getting up at that time of the day, I think, to watch that kind of racing. You know, we'll come on to the regs later and whether it's tweaked it a bit too much potentially. But, you know, what can you say? We had 120 odd, like you said, overtakes. I'm looking forward to the sprints. I think next week in China, for example, we've got a sprint race where essentially those 120 overtakes could happen in the course of a handful of laps. So, yeah, it's the product we wanted. But Mercedes, we knew they had this engine advantage, if you like, from the compression ratios, but I do think that they've also obviously built one hell of a car, because if you look at the other Mercedes powered cars, they weren't anywhere near as strong for reasons we've discussed as well. But I just think at the moment it's very worrying for the rest of the field, in the sense that Ferrari hung on for a bit, but as soon as the two Mercedes got out front, they basically controlled the race. And you know, when you look at Antonelli's poor start to then just nip his way back through and finish quite comfortably second, then yeah, it could be ominous for the next few races at least.
Yeah, it definitely could be, and we will talk about the regs, but there could be a tweak coming, so Mercedes really needs to get out ahead, as they have done. And you mentioned there, MMB, about Ferrari and their very strong starts. But while we may have had the biggest regulation change in the history of the sports, there is one constant that we can always rely on, and that is that Ferrari will mess up their strategy. So the reason we had great racing for the first 12 races and why it stopped at that point was because we had a virtual safety car courtesy of Isaac Hadjar having to pull to the side of the road because his engine had blown up. Don't blame Ford, apparently, or Red Bull powertrains. And actually, the interesting thing here, just to digress, as we love to, he was complaining about the engine, saying it won't last, and then Red Bull were telling him it will, and then it conked out. Anyway, it brought out the virtual safety car. Everybody pitted except Ferrari, who decided to go long, pitted eventually at 25 laps, and then we had Lewis Hamilton on the radio talking to his temporary race engineer, saying, "Why didn't you just stop one of us?" Well, isn't that exactly the question, Ben?
Do you know what? It was quite interesting, his tone of voice, wasn't it? Quite authoritative. It wasn't really a question. He was telling them what he wanted to do. And he wouldn't say whether it was him or Leclerc should have stopped. You know, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but we don't know. We still don't know, actually, whether that would have made a difference. But I think it would have prolonged the Ferrari fight. And I think that is the one thing that we were sadly missing in the middle stages of the race. I mean, that was... I suppose that's... Sorry, I'm digressing now. But the first bit was really good, wasn't it? All the overtaking and quite an exciting start. And then it went into that lull. And then the end just become a bit of a slam dunk for Mercedes. But during that lull, I thought that Ferrari could have been in more in contention. Yeah, Hamilton's language was quite telling. Quite authoritative, stern as if to say, I know what I'm doing. This is what we should be doing. And of course, Ferrari didn't do what he suggested. So tricky.
Yeah, it was a question that he basically already knew the answer to, wasn't it? He was asking the question because he knew that the mistake had been made, essentially.
But it wasn't all negative. So they didn't have a great Saturday, I think, by their own standards. We had Leclerc in 4th and Hamilton in 7th. But during the race on Sunday, they did take the fight to Mercedes. And while they messed up that strategy, they kind of just ran behind Mercedes. Mercedes didn't pull away. They weren't losing ground. It looked like they actually have quite a similar race pace. So if you look at that data, it actually is pretty promising for Ferrari, isn't it, MMB? We could see a pretty good fight between those two teams.
Absolutely, and I'm going to use the dreaded CR phrase again, compression ratio, because if you think about it, Ferrari haven't got that advantage, so they will be wanting to stay as close to the coattails of Mercedes as they can until potentially that rule change after the Canadian Grand Prix, and then who knows, it might be that the advantage switches and this car that they've got, which does fall in within the regulations, then becomes the best car on the grid. And like you said, they beat other teams that have got the Mercedes engine. They beat Red Bull. I know it's the big caveat of Max's race, but they will be really happy. Other than the Saturday when they definitely underperformed, the performance on a Sunday will give them probably more smiles than they've had for a couple of years, definitely.
Beck, do you think Mercedes were being kept honest by Ferrari, or do you think they just turned everything down?
Well, I mean, that's the question.
That is the question, and I think you mentioned the fact that Antonelli was able to get back into second place, but for me, the most telling point from their story over the weekend was Wolff's glance at the camera in qualifying. He did that little look as if to say, yeah, see. It's not as bad as everyone's making out, and he was almost embarrassed by his team's pace. It was quite funny, and for me that was really telling that Mercedes know they're onto a good thing. Whether we spoke about it at the top of the pod and many a time, but it's whether this advantage will remain for a period of time or whether other teams will sort of catch them up is that's Formula One, isn't it? But I just thought that was really telling, that moment in qualifying, that the team know they've got so much pace.
Yeah, I mean, they were nearly 8 tenths quicker on Saturday than the next non-Mercedes car. That was George Russell. And the thing is, we've known Toto Wolff, the Mercedes team principal, a long time, and it was very clear he was in his cheeky mode, as in extremely happy, kind of playing around a bit. We've seen him like this before, haven't we, in the years where they were dominant, where he really, he's enjoying his job right now. Yes, I do agree with you. I do wonder the same thing. Have they turned it down? Because we still don't know these engines. And I suspect they probably were playing it safe, although from testing it didn't look like they've got reliability issues. But yes, I think if we hadn't had the VSC and Ferrari were a bit more in the mix, we would have had a clearer answer. But yeah, I think it's a long old season, so I'm sure we'll find out. Let's move on to the Red Bull stable. And we're not going to go where you think we're going to go. We're not going to talk about Max Verstappen here. I want to talk about Arvid Lindblad, the 18-year-old, youngest ever Briton to race in Formula One. And what a brilliant debut he made. He has been excellent all weekend. It's been very cute. Go on the socials of anywhere, actually, that mentions F1. His parents and his grandparents were there with him to see him qualify 9th and finish 8th to score points on his debut. He said he was living his dream, and it was absolutely beautiful to see, wasn't it, MMB?
Yeah, we always love a rookie, don't we? We had so many last year, whereas Lindblad is the only one, of course, this year. So he's the only one jumping into that car. Maybe the big regulation rule change that affects everyone will help him settle in a bit quicker because everyone's got to adjust. But also I think it's telling that it wasn't just a straightforward weekend for Red Bull or for Racing Bulls, but he outperformed Liam Lawson in every single session over the course of that weekend. Now, they say in F1 you should just want to beat your teammate, but this is a guy who was promoted to Red Bull, albeit for 2 races last year. So clearly highly regarded within the Red Bull stable, if you like. And Lindblad's gone out there on debut and basically beat him, wiped the floor with him to an extent. He never really looked in danger of dropping out the points, was mixing it with world champions and the Mercedes at times. So, I suppose the thing for him now is it's being realistic about whether he can maintain that. But what a way to debut in Formula One.
Yeah, he was running up to third at one point. In contrast, his teammate Liam Lawson finished 13th. So, well, great from the Racing Bulls' point of view, as in that car seems to work. But yeah, not great for Liam Lawson. And then McLaren, Ben, your favourite team, or certainly the one whose book is paying all your bills at the moment. Oscar Piastri. Now, you've cursed him. I'm going to put it out there. You predicted him to win the race and to break the curse of no Australian having ever won Down Under before, and he crashed on the way to the grid, and that is your fault.
Yeah, probably. It's probably as much my fault as it was his, according to him, because his quote afterwards was that it was a number of situations or scenarios which contributed. Well, I'm afraid I'm not buying that, because it was a painted curb and he was on his way to the grid on cold tyres, and we all know what happens if you go on a painted curb with cold tyres. You lose control and you spin off, and it was all very embarrassing. And I think that I was really upset for him, because I wanted him to win that race. I really wanted him to avenge all the misery and the negativity from last year. But of course, all it's done is just increase the pressure next time around, which is a real shame, especially with those grandstands being predominantly papaya orange. Did you see that? That looked really cool, didn't it?
Looked cool.
All the shirts. It was very impressive. And to see your homegrown hero go out before the race has even started is sad for all those fans as well. But anyway, I think it was, generally I enjoyed the race. I think...
well, so hang on, go back to Piastri. You're not buying that there was an electrical surge and that it was a triple whammy of cold tyres, painted curb, and a surge in energy at just the wrong moment, which spun him into the wall. You're saying it's 100% Piastri.
Well, it's not really a power surge, is it? It's he's putting his foot down, and generated all that wheel spin and just didn't get any traction and lost control. It's not. I don't think it's a mechanical failure. I think it's
no. As in, it's obviously these batteries that they don't. None of us seem to fully understand yet, let alone the drivers. Obviously, we saw Verstappen crash on Saturday in qualifying. He said a similar thing, that he suddenly had this surge from the battery. Piastri, there's been some suggestion that he had a surge at exactly the wrong time. So, but you're not buying it.
Well, look, he's the guy that's driving it. Very unlucky, unfortunate situation.
I thought I was ashamed not to see Anthony Hamilton out hugging people again. I thought that would have been a nice little bring it full circle from last year.
Yeah, I mean Isaac Hadjar, he's not finished 2 Australian Grand Prix in a row either now, has he?
Well, it didn't do his career any harm, let's put it like that. Lando Norris 5th. Not a particularly happy bunny, but I think that's understandable given he's gone from being world champion to realising his car is not at the front. And he is a lovely segue into talking about the new regulations, because there has been a lot of chat about what we saw on Sunday. And I want to start first off, before we get to the Mario Kart comments, I want to start with the safety element of it, because I think this is actually very serious, and this is why F1 and the FIA have come out already and said, look, we're going to go racing for 3 races. So we've got just had Australia, we've got China this weekend, and then Japan. And then we obviously have the 2 in the Middle East, which probably won't happen, but we'll get to that. So they're going to go racing 3 times and then make a decision if there needs to be a tweak. Because Norris has come out and said, we are going to have a big accident. You've got this kind of driving where there's basically a massive difference, a differential in the speeds, because if you're in recovery mode, you're going slower, whereas if you're deploying, you're obviously going much faster. Norris said the difference in speed can be anything from 30, 40 or 50 kilometres an hour. And when it's that different in speed, if you hit another car going slower, he says you're going to go flying, you're going to go over the fence, and you're going to do a lot of damage to yourself and maybe to others. And that's a pretty horrible thing to think about. And as I mentioned, there are conversations happening. They are potentially looking to change the regs if it is required. We need to go racing again. I think that is the correct decision. You can't change it just after one race. But that must be pretty scary, because we saw it at the start, didn't we, Ben? That the drivers all got away at completely different times, which can be really scary. And we have seen enormous crashes at the start before, and we don't want to see that.
Yeah. No, we don't want to see crashes, and safety is obviously important. But is it not a case of people just adjusting to this new formula? Is it a safety issue or just a readjustment? And yes, the cars do slow down when they're regenerating battery. That's nothing new. We've had that before. It's just that it's more amplified now because of the recovery is so much more, the slow speed and etc. I just think it's something we've got to get used to. I don't think it is a change of the rules. There's a suggestion that they could turn down the power and how much influence that battery has. I think that is definitely something to explore. So, there's less battery to top up and there's less battery to use, which is an interesting proposal. But I think it's just something we've got to just adjust to. It's like there were so many variables. I mentioned this before. It was always going to be a new type of racing, a new type of driving, and it's just another thing that we've got to get our heads around. And the drivers, of course, have got to do the same.
Yeah, okay, look, let's move on to these Mario Kart comments, which came from Max Verstappen, who has been nothing but critical about the regulations pretty much since the start. He's already described them at testing as Formula E on steroids. This weekend, he compared it to what I do at home playing Mario Kart. He says, for me, I didn't enjoy the way we raced. It's not really proper. He's referring to the fact that you don't go flat out. You don't accelerate out of corners. It's not foot to the floor racing. You're basically racing to harvest this battery, to deploy it to overtake. You've got boost buttons, overtake mode, aero mode, all these gadgets and gizmos and gimmicks, it seems. M&B, what have you made of it?
Look, I think it's a very different argument if you're a Formula One driver or a Formula One fan, isn't it? And that includes the safety element that you guys were talking about there. Those drivers want to drive the fastest. They want to be able to just go wheel to wheel and things like that. But I think I watched it yesterday morning and there was criticism still. There was criticism that I suppose this is almost fake in the sense that we're having to create an environment where we can have wheel-to-wheel racing. But I think people are living in a bit of a dream world if anyone thinks that a modern global sport can only really feed those people who get bleary-eyed over V10s or feats of engineering and things like that. It's an entertainment product at the end of the day, and one designed not only to entertain but to also make money. So they need the overtakes, they need wheel-to-wheel racing. We'd be the first to complain if we were sat in a press room watching a Grand Prix where there's 4 or 5 overtakes in the whole race, because that's not racing either, is it? So it is quite difficult to find the balance. Maybe this has tipped it a little bit too far the other way, but as Ben mentioned earlier, everyone is still finding their feet with these new regulations, and it might be by 4 or 5 races in that we have found some kind of status quo where the racing is good, the safety's better, and the drivers understand these cars more, but something then that we can all then still enjoy.
I was thinking about this Sunday watching it, and for me it did feel a little bit artificial, and I'd kind of come into the race with this preconceived idea that I wasn't going to like the artificial element to it. But then I remembered DRS was massively artificial anyway, and we kind of accepted that. And then I thought, does it really matter? After a while, does it really matter? I don't know. I mean, I think what annoyed me was the fact that F1 leaned into that statistic of, we've had so many 125 overtakes, was it? That's kind of like, yeah, cheers, guys. Thanks for that. But I don't think they should have done that. I just think that
it was supposed to be in comparison. It was 125 overtakes this year compared to 45 last year.
Yeah, and that's what the regulation is designed to do. But what qualifies as an overtake? Is it someone going slow to recharge a battery and someone else goes past, having to, boost past, and then that other person that was harvesting the battery then overtakes that person? Is that 2 overtakes? It's yes, technically, but it's a bit artificial, isn't it? And I think it's like it almost becomes a statistic that doesn't matter. It's just irrelevant.
But is that any different to being 1 second in close to the guy in front, opening your rear wing, getting the DRS and passing by, but that guy also had DRS and can then get you again? It's just a similar, different way of almost doing the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess it's just it's much more powerful now in terms of the energy and the boost, and you will see more overtakes as a consequence of just how significant that power is that doesn't last the duration of a lap. And it's being strategic as to when you use it. I just think the whole statistic of overtakes is meaningless, and it should be down to ability and skill, which we will see eventually, and we'll come to appreciate where someone pulled off a great overtaking manoeuvre, and it might not be pulling out of a slipstream and getting past, but it would be, oh yeah, that was a good move because back there he lifted and regenerated a battery and then used the boost at this opportunity. I mean, it's just different. It's just different, and we'll come to get used to it. I think that's the whole thing.
Are you being positive in your old man moany way?
Yeah, I know. Felt really weird, didn't it?
Yeah, it's
It felt
like
really weird.
it's very unrecognisable.
I couldn't.
Are you AI?
Yeah, I couldn't believe the words were quite coming out. Yeah, yes, yeah. It's this weepy eye I've got going on, but no, I think that I wanted to. I didn't want to hate it. I didn't really want it to fail or anything like that. But I was conscious that it was always going to be different, and it will take some getting used to. And I just think that it doesn't really matter. It just be. It's just an evolution of Formula One, and I do think it's a shame because, you know, there's so much confusion. I looked on Twitter and saw all the comments, and particularly in the US, who had the Apple thing to deal with and using F1 TV rather than Sky, and lots of confusion there. And I think that so many things have changed overnight for an audience that was new to it that you do risk alienating people. I think that's a very big problem that Formula One sort of underestimated. But the product that they've got left, I think, does have potential.
Yeah. Okay, well, while we're on this like strangely positive note from Ben, let's stay positive and let's move on to the newbie teams and MMB as our newbie. You are our Audi and Cadillac reporter for the season. Let's start with Audi because they scored points on their debut, let's say. Obviously, they took over Sauber, so they're not really a new team, but they are rebranded as Audi. Gabriel Bortoleto finished ninth, getting points for that team. So, look, you used to be the reporter at PA, the Newswire, and you had your job was basically to pick out the top stories. What would you be writing about Audi?
I think it's very much a case of under the radar. When we had Cadillac have made a big splash with the Super Bowl, they're a brand new team, they're the 11th team, we've got Ford, etc., etc. Audi taking over that Sauber team, because it's been happening for a period of time anyway, there is that idea that they've just stuck a new, four-ring sticker on a car. But we need to remember, firstly, that is an Audi power unit in the back of that car. That's something they've been working on. It's brand new. They're the only team to use it. They're the only team to test it. And it seemed to work a treat, you know. Bortoleto got through to the top 10 shootout in qualifying. He out-qualified Nico Hülkenberg, who was 11th, you know. They were Hülkenberg on the cusp. They could have had two in that top 10 shootout. Now, Sunday started in dreadful fashion when Hülkenberg couldn't start the race. That's a mixture of a new team, new regulations and all those things. But Bortoleto definitely showed that there's pace in that car, there's reliability in that car. Let's be honest, there's a very good young driver in that car. And I think Audi will be heading to China absolutely over the moon. Not only even really to have scored points, but to have completed a race, to have competed in qualifying. They will be delighted with how their Australian Grand Prix panned out for sure.
And how are Cadillac doing? Because brand new for them, they are the 11th team on the grid, their first race. A bit of a mixed bag. Sergio Perez finished, but he was last, and Bottas didn't. So what was their assessment of their weekend?
I think it's a completely different scale of things for Cadillac, isn't it? You mentioned there Sergio Perez finished the Grand Prix. That to them is scoring points at this stage almost, isn't it? That's all they can really aim for at this stage of a new team. We saw it a few years ago when we had Caterham and Manor and all those guys come in. You're going to be slightly off the pace. You've got a new team, a new setup. I do think it was a bit of a masterstroke getting Perez and Bottas. They've got their critics, obviously. But at the moment, these guys aren't competing for wins. They're building a team, and you couldn't really ask for two more experienced heads with a point to prove as well, you know, from their perspective. So, yes, Valtteri Bottas didn't finish. He didn't even complete that many laps, of course, but Perez, I think, was about 3 laps down. But at the moment, these guys are learning. So every lap that these guys can complete is perfect. It's what they need to be doing is just putting lap after lap after lap on that car. And as I think we're about to discuss, they aren't the worst team in the field at the moment.
Yes, we don't want Ben. We don't want Ben. Let's not stay too positive, Ben. This is odd. It's an odd feeling.
Yeah.
You're doing Aston Martin for us. I mean, just take it away. And my goodness, what a bad weekend for them.
Yeah. I mean, look, we kind of knew it was going to be bad going into the weekend, and we spoke about this. You know, they held a press conference on the Thursday saying it's all Honda's fault. We're working with them to try and sort it out, but it was just awful. Painful weekend. I really don't like to see cars coming into the pits and then going back out 3 laps down. For me, I don't think they should be allowed to do that. I just think it. I know why, because they want to test the car, but it just looks terrible, doesn't it? It looks terrible for Formula One. It looks terrible for Aston Martin. Just a miserable weekend, and I really can't see it improving in time for China. I think that's probably the biggest concern. I don't think that there's anything in the pipeline that's going to resolve the problems they've got with this vibration, which is causing the issue for the drivers, and obviously performance is down as well. So thoroughly miserable. No light at the end of the tunnel. I'm back in negative mode, so I need to pop out of that.
Right. So, I mean, to put it into context, Fernando Alonso did 21 laps. Lance Stroll did 43, which was more than they thought at the start of the weekend. But you're right. We go to China this weekend. They aren't bringing in any new parts because it's just too far. There's no time to reset in between because they're basically all of their energy is going to be going into taking down the car and putting it back together again. So, yeah, I don't expect much to change. Okay, so that was a quick overview of the Grand Prix, but was there any other gossip from the weekend that we've missed? MMB, what have you been hearing?
So I'm going to talk about something that wasn't made. Everyone was aware of it. It was in the news, but I think it's worth touching on. And I'd like to get your view on it, actually, Beck, if that's okay. And that's the in her corner, the 6th turn of that Albert Park track. It was International Women's Day on race day, of course, on Sunday, and for the first time ever, they named a corner after 2 women, which I thought was great to see. Obviously, Laura Muller from Haas and Hannah Schmidt at Red Bull, and I think that's a really positive move to do things like that, and especially when it dovetails nicely with International Women's Day. You know, there's more women coming into this sport than ever now, not just from fans, but through people in the paddock, people in the garages, people, you know, on the grid even. And yeah, I wondered your take on that, really.
I mean, I'd love to live in a world where we didn't even need International Women's Day and this wasn't a thing. Wouldn't that be great? But we do live in that world. And so it is great that F1 highlighted these 2 fantastic women. They are absolutely brilliant. They are at the top of their game and they are in their positions because of merit, not for any other reason. Hannah Schmidt, for me, is one of the best strategists in the pit lane. Absolutely no doubt about it. And she's also just an incredibly lovely person. I've done a couple of events with her and panels and stuff, and I think she's fantastic. So yes, there are a lot more women coming into the sport. You know, I had my first season 2017, and I was the first ever woman to do my job on Fleet Street. I remember many a year actually, I have to say, being the only woman in the media centre. But now we look around and the media centre is full of women. We have 40% of fans are now female, which is fantastic. And I think a lot of that is to do with Drive to Survive. It's made the sport much more accessible for people. So yeah, it's fantastic. And I think we're seeing it more and more with more women becoming mechanics, engineers. I just think it's absolutely brilliant to see. So yes, I'm all for whatever highlights the incredible women within the sport. Right, Ben,
Yeah.
have you got some gossip for us?
Big positive step. That I think that was a good idea, good initiative. I think for me the rumblings over Mercedes' advantage is interesting because there was an insinuation from Andrea Stella that Mercedes aren't giving them the full picture. Obviously, they're a customer, and I remember before the season started, there was all this talk about fuel and the importance of this new sustainable fuel. And obviously this fuel has been designed in the Mercedes car in association with Petronas and the engine and the chassis, all working together. They produce an engine which they then give to their customers. And there's a feeling that maybe the Mercedes customers aren't getting the full details on what unlocks the potential of this engine, whether that's to do with fuel, whether that's to do with lubricant, I'm not sure, but that's one area which I think is going to sort of bubble up over the next couple of days, certainly in China. And the other element was, I mentioned it, but Apple TV. And, that was their first cracker in the US. And I'd love to hear from our US listeners to find out what they think about the coverage. Because obviously, for those that don't know, they swapped from taking the Sky feed to taking F1 TV. So, let's think from an American perspective, all of a sudden, not only have you got a new set of regulations, which are incredibly convoluted, but you've got a whole different team now presenting the coverage and trying to explain it to you, rather than the familiar faces of Sky, because they used to take the Sky feed. So, I think maybe that was a step too far. I know there was a way of somehow getting the Sky coverage, somehow looking further down on the app or whatnot, but generally they were taking the F1 offering. So yeah, please let me know your thoughts on that.
Well, MMB and I were actually on a call with Eddie Q, who is basically the boss of the Apple TV side of it with this deal. And we had a walkthrough of what it would look like. Sadly, in the UK, we do not get it. It's only available in the US. And it looked amazing, I have to say. The walkthrough, everything they were being offered was absolutely fantastic. But yes, I do agree with the whole new offering. I would absolutely love to hear from our listeners. We actually have quite a big following in America, so thank you very much. And we would love to hear from you as to what you made of it all as well. Right, so we are going to do a proper China preview. But before that, Ben, we only have a few days before the travelling circus goes from Melbourne up to Shanghai. Although, having done that race many a time, I can tell you it's not really in Shanghai. It's quite a long commute out. What happens in these intervening days between the races, Ben?
Most people will cling on to the days that they have in Australia and leave it as late as possible to get to Shanghai. I think most people enjoy the sunshine and have a few coffees. Some teams would have headed back. Some of the engineering departments would have already been at home, come back to the UK to study the data and work on anything that they can improve for the next race. The bulk of it, though, will obviously be staying out, or going straight to China. So, yeah, I think teams will be probably arriving at Shanghai circuit now, building the garages. They'll start building the cars once they start to arrive. And if there's half a chance of getting new parts out and new designs for testing in practice, then they will do so. But of course, this is a sprint race weekend. So I think more to the most pressing is getting spares, because if you have an accident, you're going to need those spare parts. So I think that's probably where the team's focusing now, just to ensure they've got enough spares to get through this weekend.
Okay, all right. As I say, we'll do a full preview to China, but that wraps up our Australian Grand Prix review. It was not the most thrilling of races after 12 laps, but let's be honest, Albert Park never really produces that much brilliant racing. But we are staying positive, including Ben, which is a surprise to all of us. But until next time, enjoy the next few days. The next race is coming at us fast, and we will speak to you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Keep smiling, Ben.
I will.